Come on. Ready, I'm going to show it to your grandma so she can see how you act.
What are you doing?
Dirty people.
Welcome back to The Factor Uncensored. It's an inevitable part of parenting for some people, a child having a public meltdown. But how should parents handle the situation? Bribery with a toy, soothing the upset child, or just going old school and getting into that ass? We posted the question on the Isaiah Factor Instagram page. So far, a majority of you, 81%, said this behavior is absolutely warrants an ass whooping, while 19% voted that they would not whoop their child or discipline their child physically for acting up in public. We found some parents to weigh in. Joining us, Lewis Hunter, Shanidria Wagner, Derek Pittman, and Sharice Shepard. Glad to have you all here on The Factor.
Thank you.
You're also an educator, and not only do you have to look at these kids in public, you have them in your classroom.
Well, I'm an educational consultant, so I go into schools and do coaching.
You see them.
Absolutely, I do. So I think that teachers know about the look. We get that look, you know, that mama's look. If the look doesn't work...
You gave me the look a few minutes ago.
So if that look doesn't work, sometimes you have to give a lick. But it's all about when and where you do it and how severe the situation is. If they become violent, that really necessitates some kind of consequence, I believe.
And Sharice, for those who say never touch your child, have that conversation. But you gave me that mama look.
Like, why would you say that? Why would you never not touch your child? I think for me, I'm more old school, so it's like, will you embarrass me is where I embarrass you. It's embarrassing because you're trying to shop. Like, I see it all the time in the stores, you know, the grocery stores, the clothing stores, Wally World, Walmart, and you just see them, and you can tell that it goes on a lot because they just, where, you know, no. And the parent is just like, do, like ain't nothing going on.
That parent has immunity to it. And you're like, what the hell is going on
Like,
here?
you need to get a little Timmy. Before, you know, somebody else, you need to get them. Sometimes, you know, you can give them that look. Sometimes, you know, it just depends on the situation because, you know, you might have to give them a little 1-2 or a little 3-piece, you know, to get them in line. You don't always have to be physical. Like I say, you can look at them or whatever, you know. But, yeah, you need to get your kids because it's embarrassing.
And Lewis and Derek, you know when a parent has a badass kid because they have that immunity. They could be tearing up the house and they're just like,
Yeah, they're deaf to it. They
They used to it.
I mean, meanwhile, we want an elbow drop them, you know. But, you know, the discipline starts at home. So it's like if you have control over the kid at home, typically they're not going to act out. Like, I've raised 3. I've never had none of my kids fall out on the floor and kicking baskets at Target or anything like that. But they, you know, they test you a little bit. But, you know, the dad, y'all got the mom look. The dad look is, you know, it's pretty solid as well, you know. It gets him in line, let him know when we get home.
Last resort, you know. Kids feel out the contours of their environment at a very early age, you know, and they don't understand respect or rules. They understand regularities, you know, where they can do certain things and get away with it, you know. So if they're at the store and they're cutting up, you've got to meet them where they're at, you know. And personally, you know, mine never acted out in public, but if they did, I'd knock all the cotton out their drawers at the store. You know, it would be at that moment. I'm gonna meet them where they're at, and that way teachers don't have to deal with it. Because if you don't teach your kids consequences, the state of Texas will. You know, law enforcement will. You know, so you have to have that, and you have to address it as it happens, where it happens.
But
you know,
what about those people who say violence with your child doesn't solve any problems, it will only make a violent child?
Well, sometimes the children are aggressive and they're violent. So if your mother is the person who gives you life and you're violent towards her, and the parent does not respond in kind, that child then goes to school and disrespects the teacher. Look at how many teachers are getting beat up by children, getting assaulted. That's because the mom did not check that child and put the fear of something in that child.
And I think it's also said, if you don't mind, what's also being said is like words like beatings and, you know, violence. This isn't beatings of violence. You know, we're not putting cigarettes out on their back or nothing. You know what I'm saying? I mean, these are children who learn consequences. Even a toddler will touch a stove one time because there's a consequence. You don't have to tell him anymore after that. And he can't speak. He doesn't understand why. But he does understand why, but it's not something because it was spoken. You know, there has to be a consequence to everything. And if you teach them that young, then they go out in the world. Now, if what becomes regular when they go out in the world is that they can act out in in whatever way they want, and the general public smiles, gives them these fake smiles and lies to them, then as that child gets older, when they become 14 or 15, they believe that you're the oppressor as a parent. and that the world is nicer, you know, because that's their regularity.
Right.
And that's when you have a lot of the problems that we see teenagers have.
And when we talk about kids, what if the parent is afraid of that child? Because there are some parents out there.
Yeah,
y'all can't.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, phantom, right? No.
There are some parents who
Absolutely.
are afraid of their
But they
child.
are.
When educators contact parents sometimes about disciplinary behaviors, I go into schools, I sometimes have to help to teach with the classroom management. And when the parent is called, the parent will say, well, I can't do anything with the child either.
Absolutely.
And we're thinking, well, how could this be? But that is definitely a reality.
So how do you deal with that? How do you address that if you're a parent not equipped? Where do you go for help?
Where do you?
Church, other family
It's got to start early.
a
It's got to start
mentor,
early.
a family member, a
Like
mentor.
grandma usually.
Yeah, the grandma.
Yeah.
Because my grandma, I mean, my mother, like if my kids were to cut up, she going up to the school, she gonna take them in the restroom and take them back to class.
10-4.
Like she don't play that at all.
And one thing that's thrown around a lot is this trauma. You know, you'll traumatize the kids. We've got kids coming from war-torn third world countries that come here and they graduate at the top of their class. They become the best of society. You know, and we're talking kids who walk with their families carrying a dead sibling across their shoulder for weeks to get to some refugee camp. And they make it to the U.S. and they perform. So I don't want to hear this trauma thing. To whoop a kid on the ass is not traumatic. That is consequence. And if you do it young enough, they'll be okay as they get older.